He laughed. He actually laughed when I said I needed help. Angela Monroe couldn't remember how many mornings she'd stood alone in her kitchen, holding a mug of cold coffee, staring out at the fading garden through the window. But that morning was different. That morning, when Greg laughed at her plea, something inside her fractured, and she knew it would never be whole again. Golden October light slanted through the windows, casting soft shadows across the kitchen counters. The trees outside, their leaves curling into shades of rust and amber, stood like silent witnesses to a marriage unraveling. Angela, 42, tied her chestnut hair into a low bun and buttoned up her pharmacy coat, trying to shake the chill in her chest with the warmth of routine. She placed toast and eggs on the table, refilled the coffee, and glanced at the clock. "Lila, breakfast is ready," she called up the stairs, trying to sound like everything was fine. "You'll be late." Footsteps echoed above. A moment later, her 16-year-old daughter Lila rushed in, blonde hair brushed smooth, blazer perfectly pressed, a perfect picture of morning grace. "Morning, Mom." She kissed Angela's cheek and grabbed a slice of toast, sipping orange juice without looking up. "Did Dad already leave?" Angela hesitated for just a second too long. "Yeah," she said with a thin smile. "He had an early meeting, worked late last night. I let him sleep." Lila didn't answer, but her ocean blue eyes told the truth. She had started to see what Angela had worked so hard to hide. "He's been weird lately," Lila said quietly. "He comes home late and doesn't talk to us, and he smells different, like cologne he never wore before." Angela reached out, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "It's just work. He's under pressure, but he loves you, sweetie. You know that, right?" Lila looked at her mother for a long moment. "I know you're trying, Mom." Angela nearly broke, but she didn't. Not in front of Lila. Not yet. She cleared her throat and forced a smile. "Let's all have dinner tonight. I'll make lasagna, Dad's favorite." Lila nodded, but her eyes stayed downcast. "I'll come home early." Angela drove her to school, like every Monday. The streets of Hollow Ridge were quiet, framed by rows of maple trees shedding their fiery leaves. The local classical radio station hummed softly in the background, filling the silences neither of them wanted to break. After dropping Lila off, Angela turned her car toward the little apothecary on Main Street where she'd worked for 17 years, a modest shop with a hand-painted sign and dried lavender hanging by the front window. Bloom Apothecary was a place where people came for medicine, and where Angela came to remember who she was beyond being a wife ignored and a mother holding it all together. "Morning, Angela," called out Sandra Bloom, the owner and Angela's closest friend since nursing school. Sandra's bright smile faded as soon as she saw her friend's drawn face. "Rough night." Angela nodded, setting down her purse. "Greg got home at 3. Smelled like whiskey. Didn't even look at me." Sandra stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Ange, you can't keep living like this. You can't keep shrinking for a man who stopped seeing you." Angela turned away, busied herself with stacking pill bottles on the shelf. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if he's with someone else?" Sandra gently grabbed her wrist. "Then you deserve to know. For your own peace. For Lila's." Angela looked down at her hands, worn, capable, steady in the pharmacy, but shaking in her own home. And then something shifted. "I'll talk to him tonight," she said, barely above a whisper. "For the first time in months, I will ask for the truth." Angela watched from the car as Lila disappeared through the front gates of Hollow Ridge High School. Students in blazers and backpacks swarmed the sidewalk, their chatter and laughter floating through the crisp morning air. Angela waited until her daughter was completely out of sight before allowing herself a breath, and then another, slower and heavier. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She wasn't just scared. She was exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that no sleep could fix, the kind that lived in your bones, in your breath. That kind of tired, The car's clock blinked 8:10 a.m. as she turned onto Main Street. The town was waking up, small shops pulling up metal grates, coffee brewing behind cafe windows, wind sweeping leaves into corners. Angela pulled up outside Bloom Apothecary, the modest brick building with ivy on the awning and a sign that creaked when it rained. Inside, the familiar scent of eucalyptus and beeswax welcomed her. It was one of the only places left that felt safe, not because of the walls or shelves, but because of Sandra. Sandra Bloom stood behind the front desk, scanning invoices with a pencil tucked behind her ear. At 45, she had that worn-in confidence of someone who'd seen life knock people over and still chose kindness every time. She looked up as the bell jingled over the door. "Hey there." Angela offered a faint smile and walked behind the counter to hang up her coat. "Morning." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "He came home late again." "3 in the morning," Angela replied flatly, adjusting the name badge on her coat. "Reeking of alcohol. Didn't even take off his shoes. Just fell asleep on the couch like I wasn't there." Sandra said nothing. She didn't have to. Her silence spoke volumes. Angela moved toward the back, unlocking the medication cabinet. "Lila's asking questions now. She's noticing the late nights, the silence, the cologne." Sandra followed her, lowering her voice. "And this isn't just about Greg anymore. This is about what it's doing to you, and to her." Angela paused with a prescription bottle in her hand. "I know," she said quietly. "I know I've been hiding it, pretending. For Lila. For myself. But I think I hit a wall this morning." Sandra folded her arms, leaning against the cabinet. "You have every right to ask him the truth. You've given that man 17 years. He owes you more than secrets and silence." Angela let out a shaky breath. "I'm going to talk to him tonight. I'm going to make dinner, and I'm going to ask. If there's someone else, I need to hear it from him." Sandra softened. "You're stronger than you think, Ange." Angela gave a weak smile. "I'm terrified, but maybe I'm also done being terrified." The pharmacy doors opened, and the first customer of the day stepped in, a mother with a toddler on her hip, asking about allergy medication. Angela instinctively shifted into her professional self. Calm, competent, helpful. But somewhere beneath the practiced composure, her mind kept circling back. Tonight, lasagna, candles on the table, one last chance to save whatever was left, or to finally name it dead. Angela worked through the morning on autopilot, organizing prescriptions, explaining dosages, refilling vitamin shelves. She took a short lunch around 12:30 p.m., sitting by the back window with a container of chicken salad she barely touched. Outside, the wind picked up. The sky had shifted, still bright but colder now. By 4:45 p.m., she was clocking out, hands moving slower than usual. Sandra touched her arm before she left. "You're not alone," she said. Angela nodded, keys in hand. "I know." She didn't know what she'd find when she asked. But whatever it was, she would stop pretending tonight. Angela stood in the checkout line at Hollow Ridge Grocery, fingers wrapped tightly around a jar of marinara sauce. The lasagna noodles were in the basket, along with ricotta, fresh basil, and the red wine Greg liked. Even as her heart clenched with unease, her hands kept moving like they believed in something her mind no longer did. She checked the time. 5:10 p.m. She should be home already, preheating the oven, folding napkins, lighting candles. But something was pulling her back, a heaviness in her chest she couldn't explain. Still, she paid for the groceries, packed them into the back seat, and sat behind the wheel, keys in hand, unmoving. After a few breaths, she pressed Greg's number and held the phone to her ear. It rang, and rang, and rang. Finally, he answered. His voice came through muffled and distracted. "Yeah." "Hey, I was just checking when you'd be home," Angela said carefully. "Lila's expecting dinner tonight." "I thought we could." "I don't know," he interrupted. There was music in the background. Voices. Laughter. I'm with a client. Could be late. Angela closed her eyes. Greg, please. Just come home tonight. She misses you. There was a pause. The music swelled. I'll try, he said, in that tone that always meant he wouldn't. No promises. Then the line went dead. Angela stared at her phone. Something inside her snapped. She turned the key in the ignition and pulled onto the road, but her mind was elsewhere, in that space between disappointment and surrender. She was halfway home when the call came. A number she didn't recognize lit up her screen. She answered. Mrs. Monroe, a woman's voice said briskly. This is Cascade Valley Medical Center. Your daughter, Lila Monroe, was just admitted after a traffic accident. She's in critical condition. We need you to come immediately. The world went silent. I can't drive, Angela whispered. I'm shaking. It's okay, the nurse said gently. Do you have someone who can bring you? Angela's hands fumbled over her contacts. Sandra. Her fingers trembled so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Sandra. Her voice broke as soon as her friend answered. It's Lila. She's been in an accident. They said, critical. I'm on my way. Don't move, Sandra said without hesitation. Stay right where you are. 10 minutes later, Sandra's car screeched into the driveway. Angela was already standing at the curb, pale, gripping the grocery bag like it could hold her together. It's okay. We're going now, Sandra said, taking her hand. Angela didn't speak on the way to the hospital. She couldn't. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her lips silently moving in prayer or disbelief. When they pulled up to the ER entrance at 6 p.m., a nurse in blue scrubs met them at the door. Mrs. Monroe? She asked. I'll take you back. Your daughter is being stabilized and undergoing diagnostic imaging. The doctor will speak with you shortly. Angela nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Sandra walked beside her, hand gently on her back. Inside the waiting room, the sterile lights hummed. A muted television played news no one watched. Angela sat for exactly 30 seconds, then stood, then sat again, then stood. She called Greg. No answer. Again. Voicemail. She tried once more. On the 6th attempt, he picked up. What? Greg sounded annoyed. I told you I was at a meeting. Angela's voice shook. Lila's in the hospital. She was in a car accident. They don't know if she's going to make it. Silence. Then came the words that would brand themselves into her forever. I can't come right now, he said flatly. I'm at a party. It's important. I'll get there when I can. Maybe in a couple hours. Angela's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You're at a party, she whispered. Well, our daughter, she's fighting for her life. Click. The call ended. Angela sat down hard in the nearest chair, her body folding in on itself. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was. He's not coming, she whispered to Sandra, who had knelt beside her. He said he has more important things to do. Sandra's jaw clenched. What kind of man says that? Angela didn't answer, because she already knew. The emergency waiting room smelled of antiseptic and cold air. Angela sat curled on a bench, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Sandra stayed by her side, silent, steady. But Angela couldn't sit still. Every minute stretched like an hour. She's just a kid, Angela whispered. She was just walking home from school, Sandra nodded. And she's strong. So are you. Angela blinked back the tears. She wasn't sure which one of them she was trying to believe. At 6:40 p.m., a doctor in blue scrubs approached, clipboard in hand, face grave but kind. Mrs. Monroe, he asked. Angela stood immediately. Yes. I'm her mother. I'm Dr. Elijah Carter. I'm overseeing your daughter's case. Lila has multiple injuries, a fractured arm, several cracked ribs, and a head injury that's our biggest concern. A CT scan shows signs of intracranial bleeding. Angela felt the world tilt sideways. She needs immediate surgery, Dr. Carter continued. There's a risk, but we believe we can relieve the pressure in time. Angela gripped Sandra's hand. Will she survive? The doctor met her eyes, steady and calm. She's young. That's on her side. But it's serious. We'll need your consent. Angela didn't hesitate. Where do I sign? A nurse brought the papers. Angela took the pen, her fingers trembling, and scribbled her name with a strange clarity. She'd never felt more frightened, or more sure of anything in her life. She handed the clipboard back. Her father isn't coming, she said flatly, so I'm the only one. Dr. Carter paused, reading something in her face. He nodded once. We'll do everything we can. You can see her briefly before we begin. Angela followed a nurse down the hall. The sounds of beeping machines, whispered conversations, and hurried footsteps filled the corridor. When they turned into a small treatment room, Angela stopped short. Lila lay unconscious on the gurney, her blonde hair matted with blood, her arm stabilized in a temporary cast. Tubes snaked from her arms. Monitors blinked and beeped like a language only the machines understood. My baby! Angela moved to her side, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's bruised forehead. She kissed her hand gently. Mom's here, she whispered. You hang in there, okay? You're strong. You're so strong, Lila. The nurse touched her elbow. It's time. Angela stepped back, letting go, slowly, painfully. She watched as the nurses wheeled her daughter away. The elevator doors closed, and that was it. Angela turned to Sandra and crumpled. The next 4 hours would be the longest of her life. Back in the waiting room, Angela sat staring at the wall, hands clenched tightly in her lap. The overhead clock ticked in deafening silence. Sandra offered water. Angela didn't drink it. At 7:10 p.m., she pulled out her phone again and dialed someone else. Philip, she said when the familiar voice answered. It's Angela Monroe. Angela, what's wrong? Is everything okay? No, she whispered. Nothing's okay. I need to meet with you. I want a divorce. There was silence on the other end. Then the voice turned firm, professional. Of course. We'll talk tomorrow. Whatever you need. Angela hung up and leaned back, eyes closed. She had signed her name to the surgical consent form without Greg. Now she would sign it again, but this time it would be for herself. At 10:45 p.m., Dr. Carter reappeared, looking exhausted, his surgical cap askew. She's stable, he said. We stopped the bleeding and relieved the pressure. The next 24 hours are critical, but she made it through the worst. Angela didn't cry. She just folded into herself, her face buried in her hands. Thank you, she finally said, her voice cracked and raw. You can sit with her in ICU, he added. I'd tell you to rest, but I know that's impossible. Angela followed the nurse down the corridor once more. This time there was no fear, only a silent promise. I won't ever let him near us again. Angela hadn't slept. The chair beside Lila's ICU bed creaked every time she shifted, but she didn't care. Her hand remained wrapped around her daughter's, cold, still, but alive. Monitors blinked steadily. The ventilator hissed like a mechanical lullaby. There was a white bandage around Lila's head. Her chest rose and fell in careful rhythm. Angela whispered to her every few minutes, I'm here, baby, just rest. I won't leave you. Outside, the sun was beginning to rise. Pale gold light filtered in through the narrow window. Another day had begun, but for Angela, time had stopped. At 8:05 a.m., Dr. Carter entered quietly, clipboard in hand. He gave Angela a tired but hopeful smile. You've been here all night, he said. Angela nodded. I couldn't sleep. I figured. He checked the monitors. Her pressure levels are down. That's a good sign. Her brain's no longer swelling. If this continues, we might see her wake up in the next 48 hours. Angela pressed her lips together. Thank you. Dr. Carter paused. Would you like to step outside for a few minutes? Stretch your legs? Grab a coffee? She hesitated, then nodded. At 8:35 a.m., Angela walked down to the cafeteria. She didn't really want food, but her hands needed something to hold. She bought a coffee and a plain sandwich, then sat by the window where she could see the trees swaying gently outside. People bustled through the parking lot, doctors in scrubs, parents with children, delivery drivers with clipboards. Life went on uncaring, unaware that in one small ICU room upstairs, her daughter's entire future hung in the balance. Angela took one bite of the sandwich and put it down. The coffee sat untouched. Her phone buzzed. It was Sandra. Any change? She's stable, Angela said softly. Still not awake, but stable. There was a pause. And Greg? Sandra asked. Angela glanced at the screen. Still no contact. Not a single call. Not a text. Nothing. At 9:02 a.m., Angela stepped out of the cafeteria and into the hallway near the ICU. She was just about to turn the corner toward Lila's room when she saw a group of nurses rush past her, pushing a stretcher. She stepped back instinctively, giving them space. And that's when she saw him, the man on the stretcher, pale, unconscious, his face bruised and bloodied. Greg, her husband. Angela froze. Greg. A nurse turned to her, professional but firm. You know him? She nodded slowly. He's my husband. He was brought in half an hour ago from a car crash. The police believe alcohol was involved. Angela stood, still as the stretcher rolled past. Greg's eyes fluttered, but didn't open. His mouth was slightly open, blood at the corner. He looked nothing like the man who had laughed at her yesterday. One of the nurses whispered something about multiple fractures, possible spinal trauma. Unknown passenger who fled the scene. The hallway grew quiet again. Angela walked back to Lila's room in a daze. She sat down, but couldn't feel the chair beneath her. Couldn't feel anything. How poetic, she thought. Her daughter had nearly died yesterday. Greg didn't care enough to show up. And now he was here. Same hospital. Same floor. Same building. Angela stared out the window, her hand still resting on Lila's. There was no satisfaction in it, not yet. Just the beginning of something colder, darker, and irreversible. Angela didn't return to her chair right away. She stood in the hallway outside Lila's room, staring at the closed doors at the far end of the corridor, the ones they had just wheeled Greg through. Somewhere behind them, machines were now breathing for a man who had, hours earlier, laughed while their daughter fought for her life. She wasn't sure how long she stood there. Eventually, a voice broke through her fog. Mrs. Monroe. Angela turned. A man in a navy suit approached, badge clipped to his belt, a notebook in hand. His face was lined, his expression neutral, but not cold. I'm Detective Johnson, he said. Would you have a moment to speak with me in private? Angela looked through the window into Lila's room. Monitors blinked steadily. Nurses moved with quiet precision. She nodded. They stepped into a small conference room just down the hall. The blinds were closed. The hum of fluorescent lighting filled the silence as Detective Johnson took a seat opposite her. I want to start by saying we're doing everything we can, he said. But we have some developments you need to be aware of. Angela said nothing. The vehicle that hit your daughter, it didn't stop. She flinched. We originally assumed it was a random hit and run, he continued. But surveillance footage from a gas station 2 blocks away caught a partial plate. It led us to a black Audi registered under a rental agreement, paid for by a corporate account tied to your husband's business. Angela's stomach turned. No, she whispered. That can't be right. Greg, he wasn't driving, was he? The detective looked down at his notes. According to witnesses, your husband and a woman, Vanessa Price, were seen leaving a private party at around 5:30 p.m. yesterday evening. They appeared to be arguing. They got into that same black Audi. About 40 minutes later, your daughter was hit 4 blocks from her school. Angela could barely breathe. No skid marks. No signs the car tried to stop, the detective said carefully. We now believe it may not have been an accident. Angela's hands trembled on the table. You're saying someone tried to hurt her? The detective didn't answer directly. We've confirmed the passenger. Vanessa Price fled the scene. She's now wanted for questioning. And we believe she and your husband were not just romantically involved, but financially entangled as well. Angela closed her eyes. Of course it was Vanessa. Greg had denied it for months. Just a coworker. Just late meetings. Just business. But Lila had known. She'd sensed it before Angela did. And now it was so much worse than betrayal. This wasn't just infidelity. It was endangerment. It was attempted murder. It was evil. At 11:45 a.m., Angela returned to Lila's bedside. The hum of the machine soothed and stabbed her at once. Sandra had arrived again, sitting quietly beside the bed. Angela whispered what the detective had told her. Sandra's face hardened, but she said nothing. What did I miss? Angela whispered into the silence. I lived with that man for 17 years. I knew his laugh, his habits, the way he liked his shirts folded. How did I miss the monster? Sandra reached out and squeezed her hand. Because monsters don't show their faces until they're sure you're too tired to run. Angela didn't cry. Not now. She looked down at her daughter. Bruised, bandaged, still breathing. I don't know what happens next, she said quietly, but I swear to you, Lila, he will never hurt us again. Angela stood at the foot of Lila's bed, her arms crossed, her back stiff. The monitors beeped softly. Her daughter's breathing was steady, aided by machines and willpower. The door creaked behind her. It was Sandra again, this time with someone else, a man in his 50s with a weathered leather briefcase and a cautious expression. Angela, Sandra said gently, this is Philip Nash. Angela turned slowly. My attorney. He gave a respectful nod. I came as soon as I could. They stepped into a nearby conference room, where Detective Johnson was already waiting. Angela sat. The detective didn't waste time. We've now spoken to one of your husband's colleagues, he began. A man named Mason Tully. He's been cooperating fully. Angela said nothing, but her jaw tensed. Mason provided evidence, internal emails, audio recordings, and a testimony under oath that Greg and Vanessa had been embezzling money from the company for over a year. Nearly $200,000. Angela blinked. The number didn't even register at first. According to Mason, the detective continued, Greg had recently grown paranoid. Said Lila was getting too observant. That she'd found something in his briefcase. That she asked too many questions. Angela felt her blood run cold. I remember, she said slowly. Last Friday I cleaned his office. There were papers on Lila's desk. Company papers. I thought maybe she was helping him organize things, but it wasn't innocent. Greg had brought stolen company documents into their home. Lila must have seen something. And now, Philip leaned forward. Angela, we also believe that Vanessa knew Lila's route home. That she and Greg argued about whether Lila had to be dealt with. The words sat in the air like poison. Angela stood up, backing away from the table. No, that's not. Greg would never. But her voice cracked mid-sentence. Because she already knew. She had known it in her bones the moment he laughed on the phone while their daughter lay broken on an operating table. She had known it when he didn't show up, when he chose a party, when he stopped looking at Lila altogether. At 2:30 p.m., Angela walked to the end of the hallway where a large window overlooked the valley beyond. The leaves were turning. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed, soft, almost mocking. She didn't cry. She clenched the windowsill and stared until the blur sharpened. Behind her, Philip said, the authorities are confident they can build a strong case. Vanessa is still at large, but they've released her photo to all major transit hubs. She won't get far. Angela nodded. And Greg? In custody now, under medical watch, and under guard. Angela turned to face him. Let's move forward with the divorce. I don't want to wait. Philip nodded. I'll file the emergency petition today. She breathed deeply. Her voice was low but steady. We'll rebuild from this. Lila and I. We'll start over. Philip hesitated. Angela, there's something else. She raised an eyebrow, tired of surprises. They found surveillance footage from the school. Greg was parked half a block away, just sitting in the car, watching. He saw her walk out. He made a call, then pulled away moments before the hit happened. Angela stared at him. That's not coincidence, she said. No, Philip agreed. It's not. She turned back to the window. She had loved Greg once, enough to share a life, a child, a home. But now, even his name tasted rotten. He had become something else entirely, something beyond forgiveness, beyond redemption. Angela was stirring her second cup of black coffee in the ICU lounge when a knock sounded on the doorframe. Detective Johnson stepped in. His expression was different this time, alert but with a trace of relief. Mrs. Monroe, he said, they found her. Angela stood up, so quickly she nearly knocked the coffee over. Vanessa. She was stopped at the state border around 3 a.m., he said. No resistance. She surrendered without a word. Angela stared at him. That's it. She had a suitcase and cash. Looks like she was trying to run. Angela felt the weight in her chest shift, but not disappear. And Greg? Still under hospital custody. Once he's stabilized, he'll be moved to the county jail. The DA plans to press multiple charges: embezzlement, conspiracy, possible attempted homicide. Angela exhaled slowly, feeling the room expand around her for the first time in days. I'd like to be kept updated, she said. Of course, the detective replied, then paused. You should know. Vanessa's already talking. Angela looked up sharply. What does that mean? She's giving names, timelines, and she's confirming. Greg knew. Angela didn't speak, didn't flinch, just nodded. Thank you, she said, her voice calm. I'll take it from here. At 10:10 a.m., Angela stepped into the hospital chapel. The stained glass cast fractured light across the wooden pews. It was quiet here, too quiet for someone whose mind was burning with fury. But she needed silence. Not to pray, not yet. She sat in the front row, hands in her lap, staring at the polished floorboards. She'd built a life with a man who had smiled in her face while planning to erase the child they made together. She had stood in that kitchen every morning pretending. She had swallowed her doubt, fed it with lasagna, masked it in politeness and folded laundry and forced smiles. And for what? So he could call his daughter a liability? So he could laugh when she begged for help? Angela clenched her hands together until her knuckles turned white. The image of Lila's pale face came flooding back. The bruises, the breathing tube. And still she hadn't told her the truth. Lila didn't know yet. Not the real story. Back in the ICU, Lila's eyes fluttered for the first time since surgery. Angela jumped up, leaning over her daughter's bedside. Lila, baby, can you hear me? Lila's lashes trembled. She turned her head slightly. Her lips barely moved. Mom. Angela's breath caught in her throat. Yes, sweetheart. I'm here. I've been here the whole time. Lila's voice was hoarse. What happened? Angela froze. She'd imagined this moment, feared it, rehearsed it, and still she had no answer. You were in an accident, she said carefully. You were hit while walking home. Lila blinked slowly. Is Dad here? Angela couldn't lie, but she couldn't tell the whole truth either. Not right now, she said gently. There's a lot happening. But don't worry. I'm not going anywhere. Lila nodded, her eyes drifting shut again. Okay. Angela kissed her forehead. And in that moment, she made another promise, not the kind you whisper to a child, but the kind you bury in your bones. Lila would never again have to beg someone to show up for her. Angela sat at the wooden table, her fingers clasped in her lap, staring straight ahead. The courtroom smelled like dry paper and varnish, a place built for decisions, not feelings. Greg sat 20 feet away in a wheelchair, his leg in a brace, his left eye still bruised. But that wasn't why Angela didn't look at him. She didn't look at him because she couldn't stand to see him with the same face. The face he wore when he told bedtime stories. The face that had smiled during Lila's first birthday. The face of a man who had become something else entirely. Her lawyer, Philip, leaned toward her. "You don't need to speak. I'll handle everything." Angela nodded once. The judge's voice echoed through the chamber. "Petitioner seeks full custody of minor child, full asset control, and emergency dissolution under grounds of criminal endangerment and fraud." Greg said nothing, didn't object, didn't even flinch, because the truth was no longer something to argue. It had become a record, a matter of police reports, email trails, and hospital documents. The judge signed the decree at 2:41 p.m. Angela Monroe was no longer married, and Greg Wilson was no longer a father. At 5:30 p.m., Angela returned to the ICU, where Lila had just been moved to a regular room. She was sitting up now, sipping water, her blonde hair still tangled, but her eyes sharper. Angela walked in quietly. "Hey," Lila said with a small smile. "You look tired." Angela laughed, surprised by the sound of it. "That's fair. I feel like I've aged 10 years in 3 days." Lila patted the side of the bed. "Come sit." Angela sat carefully, not wanting to overwhelm her. "Mom, you're acting weird," Lila said gently. "You're not telling me everything." Angela didn't respond at first. Then she reached for the small wooden box she'd brought from home, the one filled with unopened letters. "Your father's been writing," she said. "From his hospital bed. From his cell. He wants us to read them." "I haven't." Lila stared at the box. "Are we supposed to?" Angela shrugged. "That's up to you." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Lila whispered, "Did he try to hurt me?" Angela's breath caught, and then, without evasion, she said it. "Yes." Lila didn't cry. Her eyes widened, but her face stayed composed. "Why?" Angela swallowed hard. "Because he thought you saw something. Something about the money he was stealing. And because Vanessa, the woman he was with, convinced him that you were a risk, that you needed to be silenced." Lila's lip quivered. "But I'm his daughter." Angela took her hand. "I know, and it will never make sense. Not in any world where love means what it should." Lila nodded, then turned her head away. "I don't want to read his letters. Not now." Angela put the box back in her bag. "Okay." They sat together in silence, the weight of truth settling around them like dust after a storm. Later that evening, Angela stepped out into the parking lot. The sky above Hollow Ridge was streaked with amber and indigo. The air was crisp, almost clean. She stood still, inhaling deeply, and for the first time in weeks, she felt her chest rise without aching. Greg would face trial. Vanessa had confessed. Lila was safe, healing. And Angela was free, not just from a marriage, but from the illusion of one. The morning sun spilled through the kitchen window, warming the pine cabinets and gleaming against a row of white mugs. Angela stood at the stove, flipping pancakes. Lila, now able to walk with the help of a cane, leaned against the counter with a sleepy smile. "You're really making breakfast," she teased, voluntarily. Angela raised an eyebrow. "Watch it, or I'll burn your pancakes on purpose." They both laughed, not the strained kind from before, but the kind that comes from air returning to a room after too long underwater. The quiet clink of plates, the smell of butter, the sounds of a life returning slowly. Angela poured orange juice. then reached for something in her pocket, a folded envelope. She turned it over in her hand. Greg's handwriting, one of the many from the box. Lila noticed. Is that from Dad? Angela nodded. It came yesterday. Lila hesitated. Do you want to read it? Angela looked at the envelope, then at her daughter. Then she shook her head. No, not yet. Maybe not ever. Lila didn't ask why. She just understood. Some stories weren't meant to be finished with closure. Some were meant to be left behind, unanswered, unopened. At 9 a.m., they walked through the garden together, Lila slower now, still fragile but alive. Leaves rustled in the wind. The hydrangeas she and her mother had planted last spring were already starting to fade into autumn's quiet palette. You think I'll ever stop dreaming about it? Lila asked. Angela paused. No, but I think one day it'll stop feeling like a nightmare. Lila smiled gently. You're good at this. At what? Making me believe it'll all be okay. Angela stopped and looked at her daughter. Because it will. That afternoon, a letter from the county clerk arrived. The final copy of the divorce decree. Angela didn't frame it, didn't burn it either. She folded it and slipped it into a drawer beneath the sink, filed under done. She opened her journal, something she hadn't touched in months, and wrote 5 simple words. This is where we begin. The camera would fade here if this were a movie. But this wasn't fiction. This was life, full of bruises, broken glass, and betrayal, but also full of choices. Angela had been hurt. She had been left alone. She had been lied to, dismissed, discarded. But in the end, she had chosen something else. She chose to stay when Lila needed her most, to walk through fire and sit in courtrooms, to survive the kind of betrayal that leaves people bitter. But she refused to be bitter. She chose clarity and love. And one morning, years from now, when someone asks Lila about her mother, she'll smile and say, she didn't get revenge. She got peace. And she gave me a life without fear.